there are plenty of people for sure that are thrilled to work from home, for sure. When I come into this place and I see you working,
Right.
that is a cue to me. I should be working too. One hologram is seated at a desk. Can a second hologram also be seated at that desk?
It's the One Podcast.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Okay, cool. Adam, got Adam here. Another episode of the One Podcast. If you guys have been watching, I'm sitting in a phone booth for most of the time that I do these podcasts. That's actually here at Adam's co-working space in Largemont in Westchester, suburb of New York City. So I hit him up. I wanted to interview him because I've worked previously with a bunch of different co-working spaces. I've been an enthusiast my whole kind of career of going to co-work. Without that, I probably wouldn't have gotten even involved in startups. So it's interesting doing the Entrepreneurship podcast. And I assume most of our listeners are in a similar kind of position. For the audience, Adam, can you just give a little bit of your background and kind of short intro to who you are and what Idea Kitchen is?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks. I appreciate the chance to share a bit. So I feel like I've had a few different careers in my life, but academically, my background is in social and behavioral psychology, mixed with a bit of urban planning. So I feel like I've always been dancing around this sort of intersection of like people and the built environment, trying to understand in a way, like what makes them tick, what gets people excited, what keeps them going back to a place, what makes a place even worth going back to. And that has driven a lot of the decision-making I've made or encountered over the course of my professional life. It led me initially to, I mentioned, a first career in advertising and marketing, not so much on the creative side, but on the strategy side, where it was about why do people buy the things they buy? How do we form judgments and make decisions about brands and think that one brand is worth something while another brand is not worth much of anything?
Yeah.
And then eventually made my way to the built environment, where I've worked at architecture firms, real estate consultancies, sort of strategy houses and innovation shops, again, thinking about people and places. And then 3 years ago, after working with a few different companies to help open up and develop the operations around flexible workspaces, I said, we need more of these near where we live in the suburbs. And felt like we'd really reached a bit of capacity in our urban markets. So more of these where we live, and hence the Idea Kitchen was born.
Interesting. So I do want to talk about like commercial real estate, and particularly how you got into the co-working space in general, or that kind of niche.
Yeah.
But even before we get into that, I'd like to ask everybody how they got into, if they always thought of themselves as an entrepreneur. So obviously you've had a career, as you mentioned there, like a bunch of different things, a lot of commercial real estate, but how do you always see yourself as somebody who's like investing in different things, like real estate on the side hustle type businesses? Do you see yourself as like a businessman, or is that something that has come on really when you were sparked by this idea?
It's the latter. So I actually never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I never thought of myself as a businessman. Yeah, it's really fascinating. I felt like my skill set was really oriented towards helping to make other people's visions a reality. I was a really good maximizer. And so if you had an idea, I could really help bring that to life in a way that was meaningful. And I thought, candidly, like entrepreneurship was a gene. You either had it in you or you didn't. And maybe it is, but in me, it was a recessive gene that like just needed time
to express
to develop.
Psychology,
right? Yeah, no, exactly.
Terms there.
Exactly.
But it's interesting. 90% of the people that I've interviewed thus far are not like, don't see themselves as born entrepreneurs. So it's like an interesting thing that a lot of the businesses out there at least start that way. So I guess, was there anything in particular about, you mentioned where we live, where we work, was there anything particular about like commercial real estate, or even just like workspaces in general, that was interesting to you from a psychology standpoint? Because there was just like a networking event here in the office. I think it's interesting that we used to be in like tribes, right? And people need a place to go. And the work from home thing, for most people, I think like they still want some type of So did you have a psychological instinct or interest in places?
I do. And I think there's something about community that for me is at the heart of it. And in that way, there are plenty of communities that form despite geography, right? Think about some of the dimension tribes, right? You think about some of the tribes or networks or groups that you're part of, people you've connected with or met over time. You can remain connected despite having or living in or spending time in very different geographies. So in that way, geography has absolutely nothing to do with your ability to connect with others. And yet in other ways, geography is very much at the forefront of how it is that we connect with one another and form community. And I think for me, it was always really very interesting.
Right.
When does one thing matter more than the other? What are the threads that keep people, again, connected in some cases because of the geography, the proximity or that sort of thing. And in other cases, despite the geography. And I think I recognize that there's a place for both. No pun intended.
Yeah.
There's a time and a place for both. And for me, co-working was always about the latter. It was always about the community that can form as a result of being geographically proximate to one another, literally in the same place at the same time. So much so that you would choose to leave something that was perhaps very comfortable, an apartment or house or whatever it was, and actually make an effort to go to that place. Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, in your professional career, were you always in an office environment? What was what was your personal experience with that?
I think that's right. All but for my very first professional job out of school, I was in an office environment. I'm speaking slowly because I'm trying to remember all of the places that I've spent time. But yes, I think for my professional life, save for my first experience, all of them were offices. Some of them, those offices looked very different at different times.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were all office and mostly corporate offices.
Yeah. And did you find that kind of environment to be like inviting or something, like where you would, let's say would you show up voluntarily to that environment?
I did often. I did often show up. I think, as I said, they were very different. I remember that they were quite different than each other. There were some that I couldn't wait to go to, and there were others that perhaps I went to a bit more. But I was also very fortunate over most of my career to have travel as a component of what I was doing, different organizations and clients and company locations in different places. And even I found early on that even within the same company or the same organization, the place could look very different depending on where you were.
Yeah. So I guess so what kind of impressions did you have? Like, how did you get into the temp workspaces, right? There's like Regis, which is kind of like the one that's been around for the longest time. Probably people who travel, that's like the main kind of like a hotel conference room on, you know what I'm saying? But like in an office building. And then obviously WeWork, which everybody knows about.
Yeah.
But like, was there like a way that you got interested? Because you were mentioning before that you were like investors in it or something like that.
Yeah. I've always felt invigorated by experiencing different places, cities and airports and offices and co-working spaces and whatever else. And so when I would travel, when I moved around, I would look for those experiences. Even when I was in the city, I would go into New York City and I would think about, well, where's the sort of closest place, or coffee shops? Where's the closest place that's a little bit different than what I've experienced in the past that might give me a bit of new perspective or change of scenery or reframing of my mindset. And so, I always appreciated that. I think for me, variety is really important for keeping things fresh.
It was interesting. You think about that as like it's a productivity or even like a creativity thing because I'm thinking back, because I've done that at one point, maybe this is before Croissant, which is like the co-working discovery kind of membership thing. It's popular in New York. I don't know about other places, but yeah, like just thinking about like what like breakfast brunch place that you want to go to, like in the city to work at. Like and once you've figure out that place that has like the right kind of ambiance, it does make a big difference versus like going to Starbucks where like the homeless guys plugged into the charger, you know what I'm saying?
And you mentioned Croissant, and not a commercial for them. And there are others that do very similar or have similar kinds of business models or setups. But that was also one of my first.
So you used Croissant. Yeah.
I did. I used it for many years and loved being able to open up that app and know that I had a bucket of hours, right? A big basket of time that I could apply or deploy to different places.
Yeah.
And even in the same city, right? So if I was someplace for 3 days, I could spend one of those at location A and then pick 2 other spots over the next couple of days and really, but still through one platform. That was, really a smart, cool thing.
So when did you start thinking about bringing that closer to home, so to speak, right, to the burbs?
Yeah. So it's probably about 2 years pre-pandemic. So about 5 years ago. Yeah, definitely pre-pandemic. The Idea Kitchen was a concept and something I was working on well before the pandemic. The thinking about what it meant for a suburban co-working space, and frankly, and again, Regis and lots of other names, that we are not the first to decide that a co-working space should live in the suburbs.
Right.
Though I certainly have my thoughts on that. But as a result, we needed to do a good bit of planning about where, because when you're focused within walking distance of a train station, it's a very different kind of experience than if you are in the suburbs and in a strip mall or a shopping center with a parking lot for 500 cars.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring it up because 5-6 years ago, I was living in the city, and that was like one of the big reasons of living in the city and like investing in the rent, whatever, out of college was there's co-working spaces and being an entrepreneur. Like I needed a place to go. And I had actually done like some consult. I was like the COO of another company before that in Montclair, like in Jersey, and they worked out of like a Regis, which is like one of the most depressing places to be. It's not like a co-working space like the way that you think of WeWork. It's there's no windows, right? And it has that hotel or airport kind of conference room type vibe. So there's different types of co-working spaces with respect to that versus like a Regis, but
For sure.
and I think definitely like in this market, maybe did you notice, were you trying to find a space and closer to home, I guess?
Certainly looking closer to home.
Yeah.
Definitely wanted something that was not only close to, frankly, my home where I lived, but also close to other people's homes.
Yeah.
Wanted something that was close to, literally within walking distance of a transit center, so a train station, and ideally in a downtown. And when I say downtown, of course, not, New York City downtown, but in terms of suburban downtown. So very walkable, something that people felt like, I don't have to stay here all day. I can go out, drop off or pick up my dry cleaning, get lunch across the street, go meet somebody for a drink around the corner, do some shopping at the jewelry store down the road, get my shoes fixed. Like literally all of those things that you think to yourself, and if I just had 2 more hours in the day, I could actually get some of this stuff done. I could get my life done. That is the sort of thing that I wanted to build a co-working space around. And you're absolutely right, a lot of different models. Even just the co-working, it means so many different things that it almost really doesn't mean much of anything. Because there are plenty of places that talk about co-working when it's more of a flexible office solution. You mentioned Regis a number of times. You can go rent an office for a year or a month and shingle.
It's interesting because a lot of those traditional, in Miami, I have a traditional like office space square footage, and even they were trying to adopt a lot of the community co-work space model stuff. And so there's definitely like some validity to that. But so at what point did you actually determine that this was a need, this is something that you're going to take and dive and invest in and start building?
So right at the moment when we ran through some of the numbers, different scenarios, and realized that I wasn't going to necessarily sacrifice my kids' college education by opening up this space. And if we lasted for 6 months or for whatever reason didn't make it, we wouldn't be upside down on our mortgage. That was pretty much the point where we said, okay, there's enough.
Got it.
And kidding aside, like we spent a lot of time validating the local demand, spent time talking to people, friends of friends, did some surveying, used local chat boards or other community messaging boards, and put out feelers. Like we happened to actually also see some other people doing the same thing.
Yeah.
You're
I was smiling because it was a financial, and this was a decision you have to weigh out a lot, because I'm thinking like most of the people that are involved with us are like SaaS software companies or service company agency type things, or like long-term B2C products. But like when you have a physical, not even just a physical space, but a physical space where it's not like an apartment you're selling, it's an essential need. You know what I'm saying? A lot of other factors come into play. And I just remember I was looking at opening like a barber shop where people could drink at one point in West Palm Beach, which is like it's like a New Rochelle, Larchmont, Miami. And just like weighing out all those factors, and you got to think about also, are there competitors nearby? Do you know what I'm saying? And the word of mouth, because that's the main way to get stuff out there. So it's like a big risk to take. You know what I'm saying? It's not just like, hey, this is going to work. That's something you need to have the
for sure
plan worked out. So
a lot of unknowns
with anybody or any other like people who had similar businesses, or like how did you? Obviously, you have about leases and everything from your real estate experience, but like how do you investigate the mechanics and research on?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So one, definitely wanted to make sure we built a good team around us. So a really good accountant, a really good attorney, and people who were also, I don't literally mean invested, but probably like emotionally invested in our success, or at least our ability to see this thing through in some way. So it was really important, and wanted to make sure we had people we could trust. What I would say locally, like in terms of the idea, we spent a good bit of time again talking to people and working through the operational concept, because it's all well and good to say, okay, I'm going to open a co-working space, but we talked about already how there are so many different models, not to mention then the operational model, like are we going to be staffed? Are we not going to be staffed? Are we going to have full-time memberships? Are we going to have part-time? Are we just doing by the day stuff? There's so many levers that you can choose to pull, to say nothing of the space you choose to have, right? We're in this space together. We've made some decisions, and our business choices in a way are laid out just as a result of how much space we have, how much of it is enclosed in offices, how much of it is open desks, conference rooms like this one, that sort of stuff. So we had to work through a number of different scenarios like that.
Yeah, I think the mechanics of that, the actual space, it seems very complicated, just with like where you have the interior. Like, how do you weigh how many people are going to be in the co-working space versus the interior offices, etc. But so you consulted on people, like how in depth was your planning before getting the lease or the property or whatever? Did you have like how many months of that was happened before you take the dive?
Yeah, I would say at the same time we were thinking about, I've always thought about it as supply and demand. So the demand side, frankly, is the revenue generation side. What are you offering, and what are people interested in enough to walk through the front door? Their expressed demand. And then the supply side is, what are we offering that they can actually pick and choose from? What does it cost us to supply this place? And that's of course that's where you get rent and CAM and operating expenses and all that other sort of stuff. And so we were running a bunch of different sort of options and scenarios at the same time in parallel to what we were looking at in the market. And, one of the things that we learned really quickly is that there, at least here where we are in Southern Westchester, we can only be so small, because at some point the economy of scale that you need, that you can find as a result of operating a space like this, starts to diminish when you're when you're much smaller than we are. So we couldn't be any smaller than we are.
Right. Couldn't just be like a store from,
couldn't be 1,000 square feet storefront like some of them across the street. Because as good as your deal making prowess might be, the rent is only going to be so small, right? You're still going to have to generate enough revenue to pay that every month.
You bring up like there's one in the city it's on like 23rd Street. It's literally just a room like as big as this conference room with 5 tables, and no one is ever in there from the facade or whatever, and there's nobody manning it. It's just like the back room of a restaurant or something, but it's there, and there's like signs in the door, the Wi-Fi. But it's interesting that you bring that up, because that makes sense to me. When you're actually like launching, do you have like a wait list? What, you know what I'm saying? What kind of marketing do you do in advance to secure the demand? Because I think there's like a pretty good group of tenants here, or people who are like actively involved. Did you go out like one-to-one to get them beforehand, or do you launch and then you do it afterwards?
So you definitely want it first. Certainly, we love our windows here. Take advantage of the space that you've committed yourself to and use it to your as great an advantage as you can. In our case, that definitely meant throwing up things on the windows, coming soon, the whole bit, giving people as much information as they could. But even before that, reaching out, I mentioned message boards. We didn't run focus groups, but we were definitely seeding ideas. Like, we're thinking about this, reach out to us. We talked to, again, there were a few other people, even locally, who were using platforms to send messages out in the community. Would anybody be interested in a co-working space? Or has anyone ever thought about bringing a co-working space to Larchmont? And I would reach out to them. I was very open, even early on, to partners or people had ideas about what it should look like, how it should function. And in some cases, it was really helpful because they became a voice. They became others that could talk about what it was that we were doing or what we were bringing here. I will say one more thing about that. All of that planning was well and good in the middle of 2019 until COVID.
Well, how was that timing? When did you launch in terms of it?
So we signed our deal in December of 19.
And that's like a long term, like a 5 to 10 year. What's the
right in between?
Yep,
in between. So we signed our lease in December of 19, and we took possession of the space in February of 20.
The worst. Oh my God, that's crazy.
And I'm glad that just by saying those dates, it makes you.
I signed like a 2-year office lease in the city on 2 Park in February. There's no one in the office. You know what I'm saying? Like zero people out of a huge office building.
It was probably the worst. I don't think if we could have, if we wanted to try to time it in that way, we could have done it in the same way. But we took possession. We did a 3-week demo of the space because we basically took it as it was, which was an old bank. And then New York State shut down all construction in March of 2020 as a result of the pandemic. We sat with an empty space, a fully demoed empty space with amazing plans for like 4 months.
And that's got to be like, you're waiting on this for a while. This is your big jump. It's a big investment. Kids' college money is at stake. Like, you must be freaking out. Are you freaking out over this? Or are you like, this is well researched, planned out? And what are you even thinking of that?
I did not have nearly as much gray as I did prior to that. I don't know that we were freaking out at the very beginning in this moment. I think there was, I don't know, maybe it was a mix of like blind trust or confidence or faith that at some point we were going to emerge, that we couldn't really live in that moment or in that way for forever in terms of everything being locked down. Maybe it was just some blind faith there, but I don't know that we were necessarily freaking out at that point. I mean, I will say we didn't know what we talk again, supply and demand.
Right.
I knew the supply that I had, and I knew that I had some room in terms of what we could offer, not in terms of the space that we committed to, but in terms of how I could offer it to people. As an example, like a real practical one, we designed the space in such a way where the footprint that the offices are in could have easily been stripped back and could have been more desks. At the same time, we could take away a bank of desks and put in a couple more offices. So there was a little bit of intentional kind of plug and play in terms of the design of the space that we could use to respond to whatever conditions were at the time. I don't think we didn't know how long it was going to last, but we were fortunate to be able to continue with construction, and it ended up opening in November of 20. That was when we opened doors.
And you probably had to do a lot of, I'm just thinking of co-working space, like other space at the time, in terms of like distancing the desks and like the wiping and stuff. Was that like a big hassle, or?
It was like,
or a big thing?
Yeah, we were very rigorous about, first of all, think about the conditions at that time and the messaging. Offices had shut down. Basically, there was this
like second wave pre-vaccine too. Right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Pre-vaccine, November of 20, that was the first heavy winter.
Yeah.
After, of course, the pandemic sort of things lessened a little bit in that summer. Not so much. We were still building, but that winter was really ugly. The next winter was really bad as well, but that first winter was pretty ugly. And so now here we are asking people to not only come out of your house, which you've basically been, you've been told you can't go into an office. You can't go into a shared office with your company because it's all shut down. But, oh, by the way, you can go into a shared office space in your suburbs. I'm sure to some people that seemed crazy. The only perhaps saving grace was that so many people, I think, were really pushed into their homes in a way that they quickly realized was not tenable to be at home trying to work with a partner, spouse, or whomever, right, who was also trying to work with your kids who were also trying to learn with your dog who, so something had to give. And I think people at the time were actually quite eager to be able to go a mile or less from their house, not get on a train, not commute, that sort of thing, and get some work done.
I worked for 5 days from home, and I was like, I'm going to Florida. I'm moving to Florida. I can't do this. But so that totally makes sense. But weren't you also thinking like there's all this like media attention around like commercials? Then no one's going back to the office. These companies are going to go out of business. Blah blah. You know what I'm saying? We don't need offices anymore. Or did you have such a strong belief from like your whole social psychology, tribal nature that you had faith in people that wasn't going to happen?
Yeah. I do think that to some degree, some cities continue to struggle for some time. And what I was frankly more sure of was that I think our suburbs, which have, or any suburb that has a good use mix to it, is actually very well positioned to thrive in the long run. Because, if you think about mixed use at a variety of scales, so there's mixed use within a building, but then of course there's mixed use as a district, or in this case, as I'm pointing or motioning to the village here, in an area. And I believed so strongly in that because I don't work well from home as well, right? The last thing I want to do is sit up in my attic by myself, never seeing the light of day, where I commute basically from my bedroom to the kitchen, to the attic, back to the kitchen, back to the attic, and then eventually back to the
movie, like Legend or something.
Right, where maybe I went outside to take out the trash at some point. Maybe.
Do you think that's niche though? Do you think like me and you are like different from other? You know what I'm saying? Like, have you ever considered? Because you talk to a lot of. I had employees who were like they would love working from home.
Love it for sure.
Blanket, whatever. They're putting the microwave in for the kids and stuff. Like, but do you think that's like a niche thing, or do you think that that's, you know what I'm saying? Like, how wide do you think that pervasive is that philosophy.
Yeah. It is definitely more than you and me.
Yeah.
Look, there are plenty of people for sure that are thrilled to work from home, for sure. And I think that is great. I look at it more like using the people that are around you in some way as inherent motivation to get your own shit done.
Yeah.
When I see you working,
Right.
when I come into this place and I see you working,
Right.
that is a cue to me
You got
that
to
I should be working too.
Yeah.
I'm not just coming in here, crossing my arms, looking around.
Yeah.
What's next? What do I have to do? Because
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by people who are working, which I think is why I want to go to a place where the point is to work. Now, of course, we have lots of fun. We get social, people spend time together,
Sure.
grab a coffee in the kitchen, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, the reason you're here is first and foremost to get shit done.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just kind of like peer pressure. But it's different.
A little bit.
If you were working in the corporate world where the peer pressure is like somebody standing over your head, where it's more like you're just everybody's casually influenced to like work.
That's right.
Or creatively or just to, you know what I'm saying? So it's rather than by attrition, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And lots of other benefits, of course, right? To being surrounded by other people, even if you don't work with them directly with them, right?
Mood was, you know.
Yeah. But I think there's a huge sort of, it like implies, peer pressure that isn't really unspoken peer pressure by seeing 20 other people in this space, really just moving from call to call.
And I do think that the in-person connections, they're like, you can meet a lot of people online, set up calls over Zoom. I've met like 30, 40 people this week just reaching out, but it's not really the same as like the in-person connection just tends to be like more stable and longer, even if you're having the same time. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where like the people that I've met at co-working spaces, even if I could have met them online, like, we just wouldn't have built that rapport up as well as when you're actually seeing the real person. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And a lot of companies, you'll read that research even for people within the same company who might be working remotely with one another. They'll spend a year and a half hanging out over Zoom. They're not hanging out. They're working over Zoom or Teams or any of those platforms, and they develop a relationship, but they only develop so much of a relationship.
Yeah.
And then they'll talk about, then we got together. Then we spent 2 days, and then it just takes off, right? That curve just accelerates.
I did that too. That has pro and benefits. I had some employees in California, and I flew them out to Miami, and then they become like best friends with people in the office. And then that was bad for productivity. They were like friends with each other now, so they're talking about personal things from just before I hadn't worked. And so I had that idea, but it backfired. But, okay, cool. So then I guess like another question. There's a guy at this workspace wearing like the Apple kind of headset.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One thing that I've read about is that people will be able to like project holograms of themselves into physical space. So let's say people were around the country, they could come to the co-workspace and feel like they're there with a virtual avatar. Will you charge membership fee?
Oh, wow. That is great. That is great.
And how would you actually fit it in the space?
How do two holograms, what kind of footprint do the holograms take up? And can they
take coffee?
Do they drink coffee?
Yeah.
And how much space? Basically, if one hologram is seated at a desk, can a second hologram also be seated at that desk? That is a great question. Talk about economy of scale.
Yeah. So just like on a serious note, do you think that people does that add another kind of variable in the field where now people are going to be even more comfortable working from home because they're in virtual environments? You're not taking your trash out in Polynesia or something. Yeah,
I think I love the question, right? Because I love thinking about it that way, and something that co-working spaces, and maybe even not the spaces, but those of us that that run and think about how to run or operationalize these kinds of environments, think that to some degree it isn't. Yes, we offer space, but what we offer is the service, right? You talk about space as a service. Right. In this case, this is the workplace as a service. at the work environment as a service. And so frankly, if somebody says, I will derive benefit as a result of being able to place my hologram in your physical environment in order to interact with other people who are there, real people. Yeah. Then are we going to try to figure out like how to incorporate that into a membership offering? Absolutely. Because there's value there for somebody to do that. Now, is it going to be the same thing as occupying 100 square foot private office with 24/7 access? Well, I'm sure not. But it's going to be worth something to someone in a way that actually enables them to be productive and effective and grow their business.
So circling back to one thing. So, and then I do want to get just one broader concept on entrepreneurship and close out. But so I was at this co-working space for, I initially had some class A, or actually that was later on I got the class A office space, and it was like Epstein's building or something in West Palm Beach.
Okay.
But before that, I was in this co-working space that was more like a WeWork.
Mm-hmm.
Then we switched to one that's more like a hipster space where they have like swings and stuff like that. Okay. They were on second. It was West Palm Beach, same kind of setup as Oregon, with the train, etc. Second floor was it wasn't on the first floor, but they had maybe 15 to 20 regular members, 5 desks, 5 offices. Okay. And they were mostly run by donations and investment from the town. And they eventually purchased one of the big buildings because it was like a big community thing. They had like community businesses. You know, you have the bouquet flower people in here the other day.
Yep.
But the reason why I'm curious about this is because one of their kind of core issues was that people who work in co-working spaces, and this includes myself, are notoriously a bit stingy. Okay. Not to attack the audience here, okay? But their meeting hours, conference room stuff, like things are itemized, people get weird about it. And you know this because you're dealing with it every day.
For sure.
So you're very organized with like your automated system and stuff, but like how do you deal with that kind of pressure? Is it really you just have to have personal relationships with everybody to get them to continue to subscribe? You know what I'm saying? Because I think there's partially, if it was just a value-based approach based on the space alone and the net benefit, and this was the experience of the other place. I'm not saying idea efficient, but people felt very comfortable like profiteering off the generosity to a certain extent. And not like in a crazy way, but like they ended up having more of they just had a situation. They were getting like free memberships and stuff like that. Because they wanted to build the community. Sure. So how is the way to deal with that just like showing your face, like really like developing the personal relationships, or do you feel like you could run a totally like automated business, which is, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. The totally automated part, I think, would be difficult.
Yeah.
Look, you've got to have some boundaries. I will tell you, we have had members ask us why we have a closing hour. Like, why do we have an open time and a close time? Right?
This was an issue with the other Workspace.
Yeah. Like, and I think at some point in running, frankly, any business, you've got to have some boundary. You have to have some on and off. You have to have some paid and some included. You have to be able to identify a model that works for you operationally, where you can expect as a business owner and operator to generate some income as a result of service offering, and then expect that some people are going to want to pay for that thing, and other people may choose to pay for a different offering. But at the same time, to be effective, that you've got to know that boundary cannot be so hard and fast that people look at it and are like, oh, I spent one more minute in the conference room and now you're going to charge me another $30.
Yeah.
What am I doing here?
Well, I was saying, I think it's like a thin, it's not even just for this type of business, but for a lot of businesses, there's a thin line with customer service where you want to be like friendly and accommodating to people, but you have to draw the boundary somewhere.
Right.
And I think it's very difficult to like where you draw that boundary. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Look, name a service-oriented or a hospitality-driven business, whether it's a restaurant or hotel, that doesn't have some kind of boundary, right? You go to a hotel and there is a checkout time. And if you don't check out by that time, yeah, it may give you a bit of a grace period, but at some point it's going to trigger something because all of a sudden it's crossed that threshold where now that entity, right, that place expects to generate some revenue as a result of the use of that space or service or whatever it is. So yes. So how do we approach it? For sure. We want to have relationships. It's not just me, by the way, our team, right? We've got community managers here. It's very much their job as well to develop relationships. It's super important because at some point, I think, I don't know, I'm talking to the business owners, the entrepreneurs out there, at some point, find me a person who hasn't had to say no to someone as a business owner who's still operating something successfully. At some point, you're going to have to do it. And I think it's easier to do it if you actually have good relationships with the people that you're working with.
Definitely. Yeah. Are you thinking about like expanding to now that you've gotten everything's operating smoothly post-COVID, right? Are you thinking about like expanding to other locations, either here locally or in other locales that have a similar type of niche?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I appreciate the sort of almost implicit endorsement that everything is running smoothly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
More so, everything has gotten off the ground.
Yeah.
In a way, it's like not, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, definitely. I think that what we've been able to do over the last now better, not quite 3.5 years or so, is really exciting. And I think that without being overblown here, I think that this is a model, right?
Yeah.
You engage with local business partners, focus on a local community, embed yourself within a mixed use area that allows for people to experience things both inside and outside of your shop, and people will show up if you can provide an effective place to work with lighting and power and coffee and Wi-Fi. And so do we want to expand? Yeah, it would be great to do that. I think one of the big questions for us, for me as an entrepreneur in this case, is like how to do that. I don't think we would.
Probably got fun.
I wouldn't approach the Idea Kitchen in the same way as I approached this one.
Got it. So different strategy.
It's
totally tied to
different structure. Yep. Different structure, different approach, different sort of approach to financing, and maybe even just like you're talking about, maybe even done or identified in partnership with a town or a municipal entity that's looking for a space like this to help catalyze business in a downtown. Yeah.
That's the side effect of it. That's like super beneficial to the town or wherever it's going to be. Yeah. But yeah, I think over just like tying everything together, a lot of people are very like in the online entrepreneurial community are like, they're more into like the digital businesses, right? Because it's the easiest to launch. But I think there's something like about a real business like this, right? Is that there's like a lot more, it's more rewarding in a certain way, right? Because you have the space, you have people, right? Like it's a little different than a digital business. So I think that more people should, if they're in a good position, looking to start businesses that have a real physical kind of impact.
Yeah, just to some degree, I shared at the very beginning, based on your question, my early professional life was very much in service to the vision of others. And I think to some degree, the Idea Kitchen is that place. Like, yes, it is mine. It is my entrepreneurial venture. But it is in service to others. It becomes
bigger that, I'm saying I get that.
Yeah. It's them coming in and trying to do their best work to support their families or pursue a side gig or launch something new, or just make a few bucks, get their work done, and send their kid to like skating lessons or whatever.
Yeah.
So if in the end what we've done is just provide a place that allows people to get some work done and support their families. And
Cool.
great. That's awesome.
What are any biggest takeaways just for entrepreneurs?
Biggest takeaway number one, operationally, be as flexible as you can. And that, again, that might not mean that you are moving walls, but it does mean that you can move some levers and choose to be staffed or not to be staffed. And so as a good example, we put in systems, I've talked about this, we put in systems which actually allow someone to have the same experience walking in the door, being as self-service as possible, without it detracting from the user experience.
Right.
And that was deliberate investment that we made in that infrastructure to run this space. So be flexible and be able to operationally adjust levers as and if you can. I'll reinforce, build that team around you. You don't need a lot of really close partners who are helping to keep an eye out for you and your success.
Sure.
But a couple of close ones will go a long way for sure. And I think the last thing is you're going to put more time into it. I'll speak for myself.
Right.
I put more time into it than maybe I realized. It better be something you love doing.
Got it.
Because if it isn't, you're going to be just grinding on that and thinking, what is this really worth every hour of my day?
Yeah. Okay, cool. Where can people find you? And if they're in the area, where do they go?
Yeah. Hey, if you are in Southern Westchester and looking for a place to get a little bit of work done and a great cup of coffee at the same time, head over to Larchmont and check out the Idea Kitchen, members.idea.com, and come and check us out.
Or if you're having kids and you're thinking about moving out to the suburbs, and now that there's a place for you to work.
If your neighbor is doing construction, you're kind of listening to the lawnmower in the yard across the street. We got all sorts of reasons why people
machine messing up the Zoom. Anyway, all right. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.